stress again that I was never High Commissioner to Maldives. That honor goes to Arun Banerjee, who is sitting there in the audience, and maybe he should have been here instead of me. But I did involved with Maldives for a long time. My first visit to Maldives was in 1987, I think, with then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. And then after the coup attempt, the then President Gayoom requested Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi to send me to Maldives because they had a lot of things, a lot of requests to convey to us. And I flew there in that situation. I was also, funnily, it was almost a family involvement in the Indian action to prevent the coup. I was the one who received the first call from our acting High Commissioner. And from then on, for the next 24 hours, Ronan Sen, Joint Secretary to the Prime Minister, and myself, we were the point persons directing our operations. And once we established contact with Zaki, who was a senior minister in the government, we did not close the line, and that call lasted about 21 hours because we were afraid that if we close the line, we won't be able to establish contact. And Zaki was feeding us live information on what's happening in Maldives. So this was a great help. And to deepen my involvement further, the first aircraft, Indian Air Force aircraft, to land in Maldives was piloted by my brother-in-law. And among the fighter escort, my other brother-in-law was flying the fighter aircraft. So it was a very personal involvement. But to move on to maybe a little background on the start of the democracy movement. Gayoom had been in power for years, but he inadvertently sparked off the democracy movement by his own policies. Since there were no facilities for higher education in Maldives, the government would liberally give scholarships to their promising students to go abroad, including to India, to study and come back. Some didn't come back, but many did. And they didn't go back just with degrees. They went back with ideas about democracy, about freedom of speech, about freedom of assembly, and they were full of these ideas and hoping to implement them in Maldives. And I remember talking to my friends from Maldives on several occasions that, your people coming back from abroad are slowly reaching a critical mass, and that there is bound to be a movement for democracy and freedom. And the present government has a choice. They can either lead the movement or they'll be swept aside by it. And some of the ministers who were my friends did take this to heart, and some of them even resigned and joined the democracy movement. So this is the background to the start of the movement. But as always with a compromised constitution, there are problems. In fact, majority voting system has a problem always, as we have seen sometimes in India also. I mean, there has to be something seriously wrong with a system where the candidate who got 48% or more of the votes in the first round was ousted by a candidate who got about 23% of the vote in the second round. That was one start of the problem there itself. Then I think President Nasheed was too much of a Democrat. in some ways. One of the kernels of the problem which surfaced now was the judiciary. The Constitution laid down the method by which the judges will be appointed, but the judges appointed by Gayoom declared that they had been appointed for life and they cannot be removed regardless of the Constitution. I think President Nasheed should have taken stronger action to enforce the Constitution, which he didn't. And he also refused to take action against those corrupt politicians who had facilitated the dictatorship for years and years. He felt that by being a Democrat himself, others will follow and become Democrats themselves. And this is akin to my friend Kuldeep Nair standing with a candle on the border at Wagah, hoping to shame the Pakistanis into behaving very well. It doesn't work. The democracy movement in Maldives is in deep trouble. I think the international community has a role to play. India has a big role to play because many Maldivians look up to India, and the group that is currently in power is deeply anti-Indian. In fact, that was one of the reasons. And the other tragedy in the current situation is that the uniforms, that is the armed forces, have tasted power. And as the history of our region shows, that once the uniforms taste power, it's very difficult to get them to go back to their barracks. So this is going to be another long problem that Maldives will face. As I said, India has a role to play. I don't want to speculate what that might be. I think we missed a chance when the coup was playing out live on TV, that we did not take strong action. Now we find ourselves, as always, constrained by the fear of being dubbed as Big Brother interfering. We always have this problem. But even before the current situation, when the democracy movement was going on, I found that our government was scared of talking with pro-democracy activists. We had no problem talking with the opposition members coming from Pakistan. Benazir Bhutto came and she got all the treatment. Opposition members from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh, they were all met by high-level dignitaries. But if anybody came from Maldives, we were scared of upsetting Gayoom. And there were just a few of us who kept on entertaining them and getting them to beat people, and that kept their hopes alive. So now India has to carve out a role for itself. I think we have an important role to play. I think maybe this meeting will throw up some ideas.
My name is Raghu Men, and as Raki said, I work for the India office of Amnesty International. I was also part of a small delegation, Amnesty International delegation, that went to Maldives recently on a fact-finding mission, especially in light of what the ambassador and Imperiled have been talking about, what has been happening in the last 2 years especially. I would like to concentrate my few words on my observations, of the human rights situation in Maldives, and human rights, as we've known from our own experience in our own democracy in the region, around the world, are quite the mirror to see the state of democracy in any country. And unfortunately, in Maldives, the situation is quite grim. Human rights is in a state of free fall, if I may. There is, as you know, by all accounts that we've received, that we have seen, that we've heard from various sources, in Maldives and people associated with Maldivian affairs. The government and its agencies are maintaining a sustained, are on a path of sustained crackdown on basic civil liberties, such as freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, the basic tenets of judicial independence and impartiality have deeply eroded, as we've heard from Ibra and the others. So in that situation, I think we can see how the state of democracy and the human rights situation are so deeply intermixed, and how they are connected, and how a situation, an improvement in human rights could also hopefully mean an improvement in the democratic environment in the Maldives. In our fact-finding mission, we concentrated on a few key elements. One was the politically provoked, or the political charges that have been laid on those of some key members of the opposition. But it would be unfair to say that it's just the members of the opposition who have been attacked. I mean, they have been the ones who have been bearing the brunt of the attack in these terms. But also the three prominent cases that we looked at, of which two were people actually, one was a sitting defense minister, and the third person was a former MP and the deputy speaker of the Maldivian Majlis, the parliament. So there is not just, so anyone seemingly in opposition of the current dispensation seems to be acted upon, and the lack of free trial is so blatant that anyone can just by just reading reports tell how there is a sustained effort to find someone guilty even before the process starts. I mean, the three cases that I was mentioning was, one, of course, is former President Mohammad Nasheed. The other is the imprisonment of former Defense Minister Mohammad Nazim. And the third one is the Deputy Speaker I mentioned, Ahmed Nazim. I'd just like to quickly tell you about some of the key concerns that we saw in the trial of Mohammad Nasheed to start with. Here is a president of a country who has been a former president by then. He's been, as Ibra said, he's already mentioned about how the two judges on his trial, two of the judges on the trial, were also acted also as witnesses. So from the beginning, there was absolutely no facade of impartiality in this process. How can and somehow it becomes, it's almost akin to dark humor, really, where the defense keeps telling the court that this is what is happening. How can you have two witnesses, also the judges, ruling on this case? And they go to the high court, because this case is in the trial court, the criminal court. They go to the appellate court, and the high court tells them that because the trial is already being heard, we cannot pronounce a judgment on this. We will pronounce a judgment on whether the judges should be recused after the trial is done. Then what's the point of having a trial? Former President Nasheed is arrested on 22nd February, and his first trial, the date of trial, is the very next day. This is a president who has been arrested under some serious charges, and he and his team is not given any time for preparing for defense. In fact, it's so comical that when the defense team learns of the first trial date, they try and go to the court and try to present their credentials, because you have to, under Maldivian law, I think you have to present, sign up to defend someone at least 2 or 3 days before the trial. So because the trial is the very next day, his defense team cannot legally or administratively even defend him. The first trial goes on without actually President Nasheed even having basic counsel, because the court itself refused to present him, give him any legal counsel. This is followed by what can only be described as the fastest case ever. 13 trials in 19 days a trial like this in any country around the world, the semblance of judicial impartiality would take much, much longer, because serious charges means that the defense should have the right under international human rights law and Maldivian law to prepare properly, to have the papers, to prepare their witnesses, to know what the prosecution is going to say. But 13 trials in 19 days tells you that no one was prepared for this, and it was quite from the outset going to be a sham of a trial, and that's exactly what happened. At one point, in fact, actually, towards the end, the defense team resigned and said that we cannot continue with the sham, and we will not defend President Nasheed. And then again, the last 2 or 3 trials, the court continues this prosecution without giving him legal representation. At one point, towards the end of the trial, the court says that the defense actually does not even need to present its witnesses, because there is no way they can refute the evidence already provided by the prosecution. This is an impartial trial, supposed to be an impartial trial, and so it was quite clear what was going on here. In the defense minister's case, he is close to the establishment. He is picked up randomly in a raid to his place, and also we see similar problems where from the outset it's quite clear that this person has to be found guilty, and he will be found guilty. And many tenets of fair trial were overlooked. His defense team again was not given enough time to prepare. His defense team was not even given all the documents that the prosecution had submitted in the trial. And so how do you expect someone to defend themselves when you don't even tell them what charges they are being prosecuted under? The case of the former deputy speaker is also quite problematic, because here is a person who has been acquitted by 2 courts, the trial court and the appellate court, in 4 cases, and then when it's appealed by the prosecution in the Supreme Court, instead of actually asking for a retrial, because no Supreme Court conducts a trial itself, it starts a trial of its own, saying that we shall try this person, and he's found guilty. So what these 3 cases actually, and the reason why we try to highlight these 3 cases was, if this is the situation of important people with supporters on the street, people with access to power, access to the international media, if this is the state of these prominent leaders, you can quite imagine what the situation is for other people, for people that Ibra talks about, people who are on the streets protesting, young boys and girls who are actually out on the streets. And it's quite brave of them, because that is another problem, that there is the crackdown on freedom of expression and peaceful assembly tells you how what a almost an authoritarian regime situation is being run in the Maldives. You have protesters who are picked up and illegally detained, and they are told, out of any provision in the court or in the constitution, that they cannot further participate in any other protests. It's called conditioning. They're conditioned, and so they're not supposed to be outside between 4 to 7. Some are told that you cannot participate in protests for 60 days, the next 15 days. There are criminal gangs that Ibra was talking about, who have been attacking the protesters, who have been throwing petrol and crude oil on the protesters, threatening to set them alight. They have not been prosecuted. They have not been arrested. The freedom of expression is also under deep threat. You have had situations where the media has been under attack. There have been threats issued against, death threats and other threats, physical harm issued to the media on Twitter. There is a case of Ahmad Rilwan that Ibra spoke about, which there hasn't been any proper investigation. So I think in light of this, we're a little rushed for time here. The situation looks quite grim, the human rights situation, and might I say that tells you the state of democracy. I think, as Ibra said and as Ambassador himself said, that we should hope that the international community, especially India, being an influential neighbor, should sustain its efforts to help the civil society and create environment for a healthy democracy in Maldives. Yesterday was a bit of a start. India made quite a strong statement at the UPR. It's not the strongest of the forums, but it was good to see that India raised these issues about the politicization of the judiciary, about attack on the freedom of press, and very interestingly, India reminded Maldives, and I'd just like to quote, that maintaining public trust requires adherence to due process. And I think this is something that needs to be kept in mind. Thank you.